Today, I'm going to be talking about 5 things you need to be doing before you head off-road. So let's get started. The first thing you can do to prepare yourself for going off-road is knowing before you go. And what that means is taking a look at maps, guidebooks, atlases, online resources to ensure that you know everything about the area or the trail that you're about to attempt. Now, it's really easy to only focus on the trail, but it's really important to know where the closest emergency services are, the nearest town, the nearest gas station, and maybe even the nearest grocery store. So be sure that you're taking into consideration not just the trail, but the surrounding area and the things that you may need in an emergency. That's enough of this inside stuff. Let's get outside next to the Jeep and do a walk around. So you've done your research on the trail and the surrounding area. Next, it's time to run through a few different checks you can do on your vehicle before you head out. Now, the first thing I like to do is pop the hood. We've got the hood popped, and what you want to do is check the fluid level of all the important reservoirs that you have easily accessible to you. And last but definitely not least, check your oil. Make sure you pull that dipstick and ensure that your oil level's where it needs to be. I also want to do a quick visual inspection of my battery. I have a lot of different auxiliaries that I'm running off of this, like my winch, some off-road lights. So it's a good idea if I just check the terminals and ensure that all these nuts and bolts are secure. Now, one additional item that I'd recommend checking on a regular basis is your air intake. I like to ensure that all the bolts securing my air intake are still tight and secure, and that none of the rubber housings are coming loose and allowing any dirt or dirty air to get into the intake. To recap, I've checked all the reservoir fluids to ensure they're at the correct level. I've checked my oil, I inspected the battery, the terminals, and all the connections, in addition to inspecting the air box to ensure that there's no loose hose clamps or bolts that I need to secure before heading out. So now that we've checked the engine bay, we're going to move on to the next step, which is a visual inspection of the vehicle exterior. Doing a complete exterior walk around of your off-road vehicle allows you to check several different components before you head to the trailhead. Let me show you what I mean. I always check the sidewalls of every tire in addition to the exposed tread, just to make sure there aren't any foreign objects or significant gashes that maybe I hadn't noticed prior. If there is something, you want to find it now before you get out on the trail, because it is a lot easier to change a tire in your driveway than it is when you get to the trailhead. Now, if you have bead locks like I do, one thing you want to be sure that you are doing consistently is checking your lock ring bolts for the correct torque. So I've got my torque wrench here, and I'm going to go around each of these wheels and make sure that each bolt is torqued to the correct specification. Now, moving on from the tire, the next thing I like to do is check all of the bolts that I can easily see and ensure that they haven't come loose. You'll note that I have used a paint marker to mark all of the bolts on my hardware so that I can easily assess whether they've worked themselves loose and need tightening. As an example, this is the upper shock mount, but also if you look at some of my other bolts, like on this lower control arm mount, you'll note that I also have a paint marker there. Now, for you all that have a winch mounted to your Jeep, one thing I always like to do is double check that I'm engaged, so I'm not going to have a loose winch line coming out. And if you haven't run your winch for a while, it's a great idea to go ahead and check that connection. Go grab your controller, plug it in, and make sure that your winch is operating as it should be. After I've completed a quick initial walk around, I do get underneath the Jeep and inspect a few different things. Before you get underneath any vehicle, be sure that it's on a flat surface, it's in park, the parking brake's on, and be sure to chalk your wheels so that you're doing so in a safe manner. The first thing I check is the drive line. So here again, because I've used a paint marker to mark the bolts connecting my drive shaft to the flange, I can easily confirm that these bolts are still tight and have not worked themselves loose. I've also done the same for the rear yoke here, and again, easy to tell that these bolts have not worked themselves loose. While I'm down here, I check all of my control arms and control arm bolts, along with my shock mounts, to ensure that nothing has worked itself loose. If you have aftermarket drive shafts, either a front or a rear, they likely have some greasable points on them. That may be a slip joint, U-joints, or even a centering CV ball, which is found in a double cardan joint. Now, be sure that you're checking with your drive shaft manufacturer where they may have greasable points and what those greasing intervals are. If you haven't done it lately, be sure to check and do it before you head out on the trail. Lastly, I'll say it's a good idea to check all of your skid plate bolts. Make sure that your skids are correctly attached to your frame and that none of the bolts have worked themselves loose. Now that I've done a visual inspection of the undercarriage of my Jeep, the last thing I'll say is be sure that you check for any types of leaking fluids. If you do have a leak, get it addressed so that you're not leaking fluids out on the trail and so that you don't risk breaking down out in the middle of nowhere. So I've completed the exterior walk around of my Jeep. I got underneath it, I checked all of the bolts to make sure that they were still tight. Now I'm going to go ahead and move to the interior because I do want to check a few things on the inside before I head out. Once you're in the cab, go ahead and start up the engine. If you're like me, you may already have your music turned up or the AC on. If that's the case, be sure that you turn down the volume all the way and turn off your AC. We want to be able to listen to the engine and make sure it's not making any sort of strange sounds or noises that warrant further inspection. Before you go anywhere, it's also a good idea to double check your dash. Make sure that there aren't any new warning lights on that you need to get taken care of. So we're almost ready to head out to the trail. The next thing I'm going to do is, as I pull out of my driveway, I'm going to go ahead and leave the music off and keep the AC turned off so I don't have any background noise or fan noise as I drive down the road. I want to just listen and make sure that everything sounds like it should. If there is a noise that doesn't sound quite right, it's better that you go get that checked out before you head out on a wheeling trip. The last thing to check before you head out on the trail is your ego. Remind yourself why you're here, and that's to enjoy the beautiful scenery around you, have a great time, and make an unforgettable memory. Oftentimes when we're out on the trail, it's easy to feel like we must complete the trail that we're on, or we have to attempt every obstacle we come up against. That is simply not true. The best thing that you can do when you come up to something that you're not comfortable with is acknowledge that feeling and don't let your ego win. It's okay to turn around and go try a different trail or head back to camp. You can always come back when you're ready. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe out there and please stay on the trails. Take care, everybody.